I grew up in a large, extended Italian family. I had 4 brothers. I was the only girl. My Italian father clearly ruled the household. We were a very emotional family. I prefer to call us passionate. On the one hand, there was lots of love and warmth, and on the other hand, there was yelling and arguing every day. People say to me, "Oh, you must have been a princess with 4 brothers. Oh, you must have been a queen, the only girl." Not exactly. People say, "Oh, you must have been pampered." Pampered? They threw me in the hamper once. I really wanted to be just like my brothers, though. I wanted to do everything they did. I wanted to stay out late like they could. I wanted to play rough sports. I wanted to do everything they could do. I got right in the middle of the chaos. I got right in the middle of the yelling. I would not back down. I wouldn't back down, but at the same time, I wanted to know as a young girl. I wanted to know, why do we have to argue? Why do we always hurt one another? And I remember I was in 4th grade with Mr. Townsend, my hippie 4th grade teacher that I had a little crush on. And we were studying the Vietnam War. And I remember thinking, why can't we just play chess instead of having wars? And I really think that these experiences fueled my interest in embracing chaos, and also my interest in finding some order. When I look back on my career, I think I might have taken this a little bit too far. So at the age of 23, I was a second-year graduate student in a clinical psychology program, and I decided to work with violent offenders. Why not? And I've decided I'm going to do an evaluation of my first murderer. And I'm scared to death. I'm thinking, what the heck am I doing? What is wrong with me? Why do I want to do this kind of work? What is my story? And I'm driving up Interstate 89, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I could still tell him I'm sick and I could turn back. And I'm wondering, what the heck is this guy going to look like? And I truly am like shaking in my boots. And the weather is beautiful, and I'm looking outside the interstate, and I could see it's a gorgeous Vermont day, and then I snap back and think, oh my God, I'm going to do an evaluation of a murderer. And I get to the correctional facility, to the prison, and I see the barbed wire strewn around the building. I'm like, okay, here I go, I'm going in. And I go in, and the door slams behind me. Remember, I'm 23 years old, very young at the time. And the door slams again, and I go into the room, and I look, and I see this guy, and he looks like a regular guy. He's about 65 years old. He's got a small beard on his face, and I thought, that's kind of weird. And I sit down to start the evaluation, and he cracks a joke. And I'm like, what the heck's wrong with this situation? I'm thinking, is that racist? Is it sexist? Is it ageist? Something's got to be wrong with that joke. But no, it was just a clean, funny joke. And so I continue on for about 4 hours with the evaluation, and by the end of the evaluation, I am laughing hysterically. This guy was funny. And I realized on my way home as I was driving that these two things could occur together, that someone could commit a horrible act and also have a sense of humor. And I thought to myself, wow, that's really pretty wild. And I learned that it was important for me to find something to humanize others who are different than me in order to learn from them. And it really helped me work with people that I can tell you many professionals, many colleagues of mine would choose not to work with. And so my mentor, around the same time, I was around the same age, I was in my second year of graduate school, he was doing a sex offender evaluation. And I remember him peering over at what he's doing, and I said, oh, I might like to do one of those. And he looked at me like, please, Karen, let's not do this. And he says no. And he implies it's because I'm a girl. Well, my 4 brothers could tell you how this one would end. For the next 25 years, I worked with forensic psychology and with offenders of violence and victims of trauma. I conducted groups, and I also conducted evaluations. I did groups of kids who'd been sexually assaulted. I conducted groups of adolescent and adult sex offenders. I conducted groups for homicide survivors, parents who had a child who had been murdered. I did lots of intense work. I even decided in my first year of graduate school to get trained as a correctional officer because I don't know why, but I wanted to learn even more. And I'm sure I had enough to do at the time. But Merle Hamilton was my trainer, and he taught me how to CYA, cover your ass. And I think that's about the only thing I remember about the training, quite frankly. But I'd like to think that this work has really given me some more knowledge about human behavior and also helped me gain some richness in my life. And in 2007, I was approached by some refugee agencies in the state, and they asked me, they said, do you think you could provide some mental health services to our refugees since you have a lot of experience with trauma? And up until that point, I had no experience with refugees. I barely knew what a refugee was. But I remember sitting in the room and actually thinking to myself, and I remember my body just got really warm, and it was the strangest thing, and I thought to myself, I will do this work for the rest of my life. And 10 years later, that's what I've been doing, and I probably will continue this the rest of my life. Although Vermont is a rural state, it has welcomed people. It has welcomed survivors of genocide and ethnic cleansing from over 30 countries. In 2007, I established a program called Connecting Cultures, and it is a mental health program for refugees. We didn't just say, come on, refugees, come to our clinic. We actually took 2 years. We went into the communities. We got to know people. We went to weddings. We went to funerals. We went to parties. We went to the Festival of Lights. We really got to meet people. We went to the Association of Africans Living in Vermont and just hung out there. And after 2 years, people started coming to our clinic. So much so that we have a waiting list at all times. The stories are horrific. They really are. And when you're working in the area of trauma, it is really important to be able to tolerate challenging emotions, and I tell this to my students all the time. It's important to be able to listen to heart-wrenching stories. And the reason is that for individuals who have suffered and really experienced trauma, to be able to find some order and to gain some stability in their life despite their horrific experiences, it's so important to hang in there with them, with their stories. So I was working with a woman from Burundi. And Burundi is a small country in the continent of Africa. And she started to tell me her trauma story. And she told me that the militia came to her village and that she had lived in a thatched roof home, and the militia came to her home because they were of the wrong ethnicity. The militia shot her husband in front of her and in front of her 2 small children, her 2 sons. She had a 2-year-old and an infant. And she told me that they managed to get away after seeing her husband shot. They managed to run. And they ran for a number of days. And then they had to walk because they were so tired. And they were all at a place where they were about to die. She could run no longer. But she had to keep going. She had to keep going or they would all be killed. And at that point, she was faced with this choice that either they were all going to die or she had to choose which child to leave behind. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I can't even imagine having to make that decision. And she let go of the hand of her 2-year-old. And she survived with her infant. Can you imagine how that haunts her? I'm driving home after hearing this story. It's early on in working with refugees, and I had thought that I had heard some horrible stories before. I'm driving home, and I want to throw up. I am feeling sick to my stomach. What the hell can people do to one another in this world? How would they do this? I can't do this. How can I do this? Oh my God, this is just awful. And I think I'm crying by the time I'm driving my half-an-hour home. And I'm just so blown away by the story I've heard and just feel for this woman. And I get home, and my husband meets me at the front door, and he says, honey, we need to focus. We need to pick out new doorknobs. We're putting an attachment on our house, and I need to pick out doorknobs. And I'm thinking to myself, doorknobs? What the hell do doorknobs have to do with reality? I can't do this. I'm like totally freaked. And I think I, did one of these, like, okay, this one. And I can tell you, I didn't have much to do with putting that attachment on our home. My husband did a beautiful job. But I remember I was in a fog. I was beginning to work with refugees and listening to lots of stories. And I was really struggling with how can I do this work and come home to the order of my household? How can I do this? How do these things go together? And I really struggled. And I tried to embrace my emotions. And eventually some order emerged. And I learned that it was possible. It was possible for me to come home to my quiet home and also work with survivors of torture and chaos. In Vermont, we have a population of just over 600,000. We have over 7,500 refugees from over 30 countries: Bhutan, Congo, Iraq, Somalia, many, many more, and they speak over 70 languages. The stories are horrific, and these people need our support. I was working with a woman from Bhutan, a Lhatsampa from southern Bhutan. She was forced out of her country with 100,000 Lhatsampas. They spoke Nepali, and they practiced Hinduism, the wrong ethnicity, the wrong faith. The king at the time, in the early 1990s, declared that he wanted one nation and one people. And I listened to her story. And I listened to her story of the flashbacks that she had. And she had flashbacks of her daughter, that every time she was in Vermont and looked at her daughter's wrist, she could see the bruising and the bleeding and the scars on her wrist. And she said she felt guilty. I thought, oh my God, here we go again, okay. And then she confessed, and she said, I did this to my daughter. I tied her wrist to the bedposts every single night. And I was horrified. I thought, what the heck? What the heck? I have read every parenting book that possibly exists. I teach parent training. Do I have to call social services? What the heck did she do? And I'm freaking out. And I'm thinking, what the heck? Oh my God. I sort of got myself under control, and I said, Karen, just get a hold of yourself. And I sort of leaned in and I listened further. It turns out that the reason that she tied her daughter to the bedpost at night in the refugee tent was that she had wandered and she had been sexually assaulted. And that if she wasn't tied down, that she was at risk of being raped again. And I looked at her and I told her, you are a good mother. And she looked at me in a knowing way. I learned at that point in time that leaning and listening in was important, and the value of not being judgmental. But there are also times that there's lots of joy in the work. There really is lots of time that there's joy in the work. And I've worked with a Sudanese man, and we were doing his lifeline, and we put down flowers on the lifeline, and flowers for the good times and stones for the challenging times. And he put flowers down for when he met his wife, and a flower down for when his daughter was born. And he put stones down for when he saw his dad shot as a young man. And he put a stone down for when the war began. And at the end of the session, he looks up at me with a tear in his eye, and he says, Dr. Karen, I have flowers in my life. I forgot. I have flowers in my life. And it brought me great joy. Although I may have taken the tenet in psychology a little bit too far in terms of embracing chaotic emotions, I've really learned quite a few lessons. I've learned that it's important to find something to humanize people who are different than me. I've learned that I can live in my orderly, quiet home and work with survivors of torture. And I've also learned the value of leaning in and listening. And as far as my 4 brothers go, I love each one of them. I have a special relationship with each one of them. They have brought my life deeper joy and great meaning. Thank you.